Welcome to the Novel Idea Society. Are you a Jen? Are you a Jennifer?
Jen or Jennifer, just not Jenny, not a Jenny.
Okay. I'm also a Sam or Samantha, but never Sammy. So I
Sammy.
completely appreciate that. They called me Sammy when I was a kid, and I would always say, "My name is Samantha." And now I go by Sam professionally. So it is what it is. Thank you so much for coming, for making time for us. We have people online. We have people in the room with me here that are watching on a screen over here. And this will also live on YouTube afterwards. So be mindful of, not that I think you're scared of saying anything weird, but be mindful that it will live on the internet afterwards. So we read this month From Blood and Ash. It is one of those books where, the book buying and book reading hobby are sometimes not aligned.
Yeah.
And it's a book that I had on my bookcase from a while ago because I stumbled across a beautiful copy of it in Target when I was in the States. And I was like, ooh, that's pretty. And I picked it up. And then my friend's daughter got me into a Polycon and was like, oh, I don't know how to she was like, how do you get tickets for this thing? And I was like, what is this? And she so I fell into the world of it. And I was like, you know what? I wonder if she'd come. I wonder if she'd come. And I didn't even have to reach out to your publicist. I just sent you an email and
Mhm.
your person responded. And I was like, oh, this is the most approachable person on the planet. This is amazing. And she told me you have a new book coming out that is in the series, but we should start at the beginning. So that is why we started with a book that was written quite a while ago to go through the series. We can talk about spoilers for the first book here. We cannot talk about spoilers for the rest of the series. Let's start there. Um, is it weird for you to go back and talk about this one when it is such a long time ago?
Um, sometimes it is, but usually whenever I get asked questions about like the first book in the series, or if someone goes all the way back to books I wrote like in 2010, 2009, usually it takes a couple moments and then things start clicking like, oh yes. But since I'm working in this series right now, it's not going to be as hard. If I was writing like a different book series, which is usually what happens. Like it never fails. Like when you have a release, you're writing another book, another series. And so you're having to switch like from a different world, different characters, and try to remember everything.
So take me back to your life before you even started writing this, because your life before this book was very different from your life. I mean, obviously very different from your life now, but this book was a big deal for you.
Yeah. I mean, I've, so I've been lucky, like where, I've always said, like when you publish a book, a percentage of whatever success you have is going to be the book. And then there is this undetermined amount that is honestly pure luck. Like it is just a book releases at a certain time, or you write something that happens to be trending upward. And that has happened to me three times in my career, which it normally does not happen for you once a career. The first time it happened was, I think, 2011, 2012 with the Lux series. And it was just a book that a lot of book bloggers, and for the youngins around us who may not know what a book blogger was, they ran so TikTokers could walk. They were
Yes.
original like review of of the book community. They created that. They had gotten behind the book, and then about I think it was 2013, I had the same thing happen with Wait for You. And I've always, again, it always was the readers. It always was the book community. It was organic word of mouth that you cannot like replicate. You cannot, you can't buy that. But the Blood and Ash series, yeah, that was different because of the scale in which it exploded. And that was Book Talk. Book Talk, had been around previous to the year that many of us like to forget, 2020.
Mhm.
It had been around previously to that, but when everything happened in 2020, a lot more people were online. I mean, or on TikTok, a lot more people had for many people, extra time. And I think the combination of that and the book talk community just exploded, a lot of books. But, I've always, again, I say I've always been lucky. I've had, readers in um many, many different countries and had the joy of being able to travel to the countries. But the thing that was mostly different with the Blood and Ash series is that is when I started being recognized at home. Um, the one quick story was my husband would go to Outback and pick up something to eat and bring it home. And also, this became evidence that we really, or at least I needed to change what I ordered because apparently, like, they knew it was going to be like seared ahi tuna, something. And there was this message written on the Outback bag that, I love From Blood and Ash, can't wait for the next one. And it was the server. So that started happening, because we do have a last name that not other people live around us have. And that was the big change for me, was actually having local people actually know, anything about the books. Because I mean, you can sell a metric ton of books and, you be at home, go to Walmart, and you could be standing right next to your book on the shelf and kind of be like, and they'd be like, what's that? So that was probably the biggest difference, was that.
So it blew up kind of during the pandemic, but when did you actually write the book before it came out? Like when were you in the Hawke and Poppy headspace for the first time?
Well, so I got the idea for the Blood and Ash world while watching the 2016 Summer Olympics.
Okay, go on.
I can't tell you.
Was there an event?
I'm sure the only thing I watch is the gymnastics. So I'm sure I was watching the gymnastics. I don't even know. Like it's so I authors, we and anybody who's a writer, you do get inspired by the weirdest things. That's why it's like one of the hardest questions to answer when someone says, "What inspires you?" Because you're always like, I don't know, like stuff. And I mean, I'm sure I could do a connection, Olympics, Greek mythology. There's obvious relations to Greek mythology, but that's when I came up with the original idea. But I had never written high fantasy at that time. I had written paranormal, suspense, contemporary, but I had not done high fantasy. And I had like performance anxiety because when you write in every other genre, you have the world that you don't have to set that world. If I say a skyscraper, you know what I'm talking about. I don't have to describe that. It's a totally different thing. So it took about 2.5 years to write the book. And I was actually talking to another author, J.R. Ward, and we were talking about books of the heart and how, you know, sometimes you just have to write a book, even if it doesn't sell or you've never published it. And that kind of was like the kick in the pants to write it. So I had the idea brewing in between books I was contracted for from 2016 to early 2019. I tinkered with the idea, tinkered with the world building and the characters, and then I finally sat down and wrote it. But yeah, I don't know what the Summer Olympics. I must have just been like, I wish I could do like somersaults and backflips or something, and that somehow led me to where I was.
Okay, let's talk about writing high fantasy because, and then I want to talk about the smut side of things, and because that's a whole other kind of writing, um, and we've we've had many conversations about this in my house. And my fiance is both amused and disturbed by all of it. Um, but writing high fantasy, I have recently, finally watched Game of Thrones. I finally fell into House of the Dragon. So I've slowly been like dipping my toe into these spaces. And then like so many other people fell into the ACOTAR universe as well. But writing and developing these worlds feels like I feel like I get it now, but I also don't feel like I could do it. How do you how do you draw out a scene? Are you looking at pictures? Like character development aside, how do you build a world of your own?
I think and by the way, I could do an entire podcast, unending seasons of how bad the last season of Game of Thrones was, but um, so
Where
I
does he go in the end? Where are they going?
to the north. I don't know. It's like, like
Where are you going? Just on a
like
horse. That's the end of the
people love
show.
that. Like, oh gosh, I could go on and on about that. But the I feel like with high fantasy, the first thing was a concept of the world, right? And I think the first thing that kind of comes to, at least for me, was the stratification that's in that world, where you have the haves and the have-nots, which is pretty much, as we all know, all books have tropes. There's not a single genre out there that is not riddled with tropes. And a common one in fantasy is the haves and the have-nots, the people in power versus the ones who are not. And I think for me, it was developing that system first and making it work logically you know, because once you get towards the end of the book, you realize what you're actually dealing with. And I think the one thing with fantasy and in paranormal, you can have vampires, gods, aliens, dragons, whatever, as long as everything else makes logical sense, right? So you can do anything in fantasy as long as you establish the rules of your world and you stick to your rules. And for me, it was establishing that first, getting comfortable with it. The characters and things like that for me at least, were easier. It was because in fantasies, the world itself is a character. You have to be immersed in it because you are, none of us, you know, okay, maybe somebody out there has decided to live, a week as somebody in the medieval times or like Regency era, but like we have to immerse you as a reader into that. Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to relate to those characters. You want to be able to be in that story. That requires a lot of research and looking up things that you never in a million years thought you'd be Googling. Things just simple as, how did they fasten pants? Or my favorite thing, when was zippers first created? Like, it's like you end up doing things like that because the blood and ash world, it's in my mind, it's a little bit of like medieval, a little bit of Regency era. And a lot of it depends on where you're at in the kingdom, how much money you have. You almost see people who live like a serfdom versus the people who are almost living in, Victorian era, about to enter the Industrial Revolution. So it's a lot of researching, a lot of Googling, a lot of Google giving you an answer for everything other than what you're looking for. So yeah, so that's usually for me. Once you build the world, then you kind of follow it from that point on.
How long did it take you to build the world as opposed to building I was going to say the human characters, and there was my flaw. The characters. How long did it take you to build the world versus the people?
I want to say, so I am not a huge plotter. And usually when I sit down to write a book, I kind of have a general idea and then I let the story kind of unravel. With high fantasy, it was completely different. It was almost 2.5 years of tinkering with it, but also I had a lot of performance anxiety with it because I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do it. It didn't help that at that time, I've known Sarah Mass for a long time. That's when ACOTAR came out. And I'm like, oh shit, I can't do this. Like, because I was reading that because Sarah, I've always said there's like three types of writers. There are writers who are good writers and okay storytellers. Then there are writers who are great storytellers and okay writers. And then there's the unicorn. And the unicorn is a great writer and a great storyteller. And Sarah is both. And so when you are about to go into a new genre, it can scare you a little bit. And so because I was like, I don't know if I can do this, and so I don't think it would take me that long to build a world again. Well, I know it hasn't, but it was about 2.5 years of kind of tinkering with it.
Um, did you pitch the book to your publisher? Did you write the book and give it to them? Like, how did your deal, like, you're going into something you've never done before. You've got performance anxiety. Did you have a book deal?
No, not for this one. And when I started pitching it, so I don't even, I would have to stop and think what active contracts I have, but I feel like have had contracts with almost every publisher, it feels like at some point in my career. So every time I pitched it, um, the moment they realized that we were dealing with vampires, it was like, nope, shut the door. And publishing, and I'm not somebody who's ever going to talk crap about Twilight, whether you like it, hate it or not. A lot of us have jobs because of Twilight. And but publishers, I think it was like after, I think that, I mean, and God, that series came out, what, like 20 years? Please tell me it wasn't 20 years ago.
Oh yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my God. Old. No, but so it was like, yeah, so for long as even like
Pretty
10,
close to 20 years, yeah.
yeah,
Because the movie came out when I was in
yeah.
university.
Yeah, so even like 10, 15 years after this, they were like, no, not vampire. Like they were just, that's like the death knell at that time. And so I hadn't finished the book yet. So I was like bearing the lead, right? Like really doing everything to like not make it super obvious what you were dealing with. And then finally, when I realized, okay, like I'm just gonna write it the way I want to, and then I was like, I'm just gonna bring in the whole kit and caboodle with it. Like, got vampires, I'm gonna have werewolves, I'm gonna do everything. I'm just gonna go the whole way. And then one of my publishers who published like a novella set for me, I just happened to be talking to them one day, and because I just had this feeling that either this book was going to be a complete utter disaster or it would be a success, and there would be like no in betweens. And she was a huge like paranormal fan, which fantasy and paranormal often coexist. And so she read it. She read, I think, like a partial at that point and fell in love with it. So, and then that's where the contract ended up coming in. But I mean, again, I was lucky. I had connections, and my agent didn't really have to do much with that. So, like, but at that time, I mean, and that wasn't even that long ago, where you said once they realized something was a vampire, they would just be like, no, shut the door. And I don't think that was a reflection of what readers wanted. Readers don't care how many vampire books are out there as long as they seem different enough and entertaining.
Um, Listening to you talk about that, the author we had last month talked about how she writes about Gujarati Indian culture because there's not a lot of that out there. But there were a lot of her books have a lot of cooking in them and a lot of those things in them. And so it's interesting to me as there's more and more women in publishing. Because when I thought of fantasy before I dipped my toe into this was always dude territory. This
Oh
was
yeah.
not something
And
that girls were really into. And there were some,
but but not a
but it
lot.
does not have the openness
Mm.
and following that it does now. How have you seen that evolve from when you started to even just up to, I even think of last year's Apolycon, you had Rebecca Yaros there, and that whole, like, there's such a wild following and it's led by women.
Yeah. And one thing that I just want to point out that I've always found to be one of the interesting and just absolute confusing things about publishing is I was getting no's because didn't want to see vampires anymore. But then you have the author who is writing something that maybe isn't really, a lot of people aren't writing it. And you sometimes get the same amount of no's for the different reason. We don't know what the comps would be. That's like that is a word at publishers you do not want to hear. What are the comps? And that what they want to know is what book can we tell the booksellers, the libraries, hey, this is like,
Comparables. Yeah,
yeah.
the comparables. Yeah.
And so when you're writing something that is really unique, it can be very, very hard. And it's, it's always that weird catch-22 position. So yeah, so fantasy has always been dominated by guys. And, you know, when you read fantasy or watched fantasy in the past, you already knew if you were a lady, it was not going to end well for you. You had about two options or three options. One, you don't fall in love. If you do, it's a weakness that will inevitably get you and everybody you love killed. If you have sex, you probably are also going to get killed. And or the last result is you're the mad queen. That's it. That's what you had to look forward to. When Sarah's ACOTAR books first came out, they were supposed to be in the new adult section, but the problem with that was there wasn't really a new adult section, bookstores, all that. And they couldn't shelve her in the adult section because how do we put this has romance in it? How do we put this in adult fantasy? Adult fantasy can't possibly have romance in it. So then it got shelved in YA, which the book series wasn't always a young, it's not exactly young adult. um and I think, yeah, you know, I think one of the reasons being that it took a while is because of that reason right there. Authors and publishers live and die by where your book can be shelved in a bookstore. If a bookstore does not know where to place your book, they're not going to order a bunch of copies. And then if not going to order a bunch of copies, like it's the publisher loses all the, they lose the money in it. Really, Sarah's book like opened up the door to readers, like because readers who read young adult, young, old, whatever, found it. But it really was independent authors and independent publishers who I think blew the doors open widely because they often, and there's no offense to bookstores, love the bookstores. They don't operate by that, right? They can't care about that. And they indie authors, independent publishers were more willing to take those initial risks, like Blood and Ash. Like it was first published by what they call an independent publisher. And all that means is this is not one of the big four or how many of them that are left now. Fourth Wing, that's an independent publisher. So I think
I bet
that,
those publishers are sure pretty happy that they took a gamble on those books, though.
yeah,
I mean, Harry Potter was the same way when it started. Little Brown Books was just like a little imprint. It was no big deal.
it was like the house Harry Potter built, and so like, and that's the thing. And when a publisher is smaller, they can take more risks because they don't have as much overhead. When you do get into the bigger publishers, it is harder for them to take a lot of risks because there's a lot more on the line. But also the thing with independent publishers, they're able to move a lot faster. They're able to adapt faster. Also, a big thing that happened to help take off was Barnes and Noble and Waterstones. So when Waterstones took over Barnes and Noble, one of the biggest changes that they made was allowing the Barnes and Noble stores to bring in what books they wanted. Beforehand, it was a regional sales associate who would determine what would be carried in the store. And they rarely carried small press books or independent published books. And they almost never carried indie authors in their bookstores. Once that changed and allowed the store managers, because you as a reader would go into, it'd be like Indigos. You would go into Indigos and say, hey, I'm going to read this book. They would be able then to actually order it without having to go through this hoopla of getting it approved. And that's why now, if you're in the States, you walk into a Barnes and Noble, and they usually sometimes will have a book talk table or like what's trending. I would say 50-60% of them are indie books. They're independent authors. And that again, I think was like this perfect storm of stuff that just started to come together because people wanted to read fantasy with romance. They wanted the excitement, the stakes, the risks, but they also wanted a happy ending at the end of the day. They wanted to feel good about investing years of their time into something,
Okay, so talk to me about the romance side of things.
Mhm.
We've read like contemporary romance in book club, but I was like, well, picking this one, I haven't read it yet. Like I read with everyone else. I don't pre-read the books when I pick them. So if we love it, we love it. If we hate it, we hate it. It is what it is. I go on the journey with everybody else. But I get a little background. I know a little bit about the authors, but I knew that this one was a little on the spicier side. It's not the spiciest by any means. I went to a romance bookstore in Saskatoon last week and I learned some things. And I thought I
Oh,
knew a
I
lot
was
about
like, if you
romance
think From
books.
Blood and Ash is that spicy, I have some book recommendations to give
Well,
you.
I learned some things last week, but I know that this can be a little spicy for people who
Yeah. Oh,
maybe
yeah.
don't read romance or read only contemporary romance. Um, how do you go about writing those scenes? How many is too, let's start with how do you get there, and then we'll talk about how many is too many and the other things. But how do you decide this is where this is going to happen and this is how I'm going to write it?
So I have always written romance, even when I was writing young adult. It was always a romance with a subgenre of paranormal, contemporary, suspense, whatever. So it's always been kind of second nature to me. Now, I don't really determine how many sex scenes are going to be in a book, right? But there is a guideline, right? Because one of the biggest things is people not really understanding the difference between erotica and romance. There is a huge difference. Erotica, the plot is the sex. And so when you have a book where there is another plot, that is not, it could have sex on every page, up and down the street, back and forth again. If there is another plot there, it is still a romance. Or hell, I mean, it could be, something else that just doesn't have a happy ever after. Erotica, that is your plot. The sex, whatever involving that is the plot. So that's where you have like your determining factor. And believe it or not, contemporary are the books that have probably the most spicy things you will ever read will most likely be in your contemporary books, especially the genre dark romance.
That was
That
where I got my education.
Yeah, that's like you will learn some stuff. Um, so with that, to me, I know readers that for me, and I'm gonna look at it as myself. I grew up watching The X-Files.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna date myself here. And
I'm with you. I'm with you.
Mulder, right? Mulder and
Mulder,
yes, and
Mulder and
Scully.
Scully.
Yeah. They, I think, kissed once, and it was in a movie that wasn't even the damn TV show. However, I was so invested in their relationship. I was a teenager, but still. And a lot of the romance and even the sexy scenes isn't always the sex. It is the buildup. It is the anticipation. It is the push and pull of the characters. So when I actually put the characters together in that way, there has to be certain things that I know has had to happen. Um, I want the readers to be like, oh my God, just do it. Like I want the readers to feel like, okay, it's about time. And then usually in series, I then like, this sex may get a little bit more detailed, and it may get a little bit more spicier, but like there's things just mentally for me personally that I always try to have established before I do that. And honestly, it's like the sex has to make sense when it's happening. Like if they were, I feel like you see this a lot in suspense books where it's like, why are you having sex right now? Like there's somebody outside trying to shoot you. Like maybe look outside. So you don't want a situation like that. So it has to make sense organically.
Is it something you were comfortable with originally, or how do you get good at it?
Yeah, I've never had a problem writing it. And I mean, probably because I have been reading it since I was about 12 years old. And the reason being is I grew up very, very, very poor. And during the summer, my mom would take us to the public library because it was free to go to. And the public library would always have like these racks of books you could take home. And usually they were books that were donated because people don't realize that often the libraries can't put them on their shelves. And the entire racks were historical romance. And not just any historical romance. They were Joanna Lindsay.
Oh,
Now talk about an education. Um, yeah. And you know what? I turned out fine. You know what I mean? Like it didn't scar me for life. I did have bizarrely high expectations of what it would be like, especially because it was so flowery. Like you think you're going to be floating through the clouds and the skies and everything. But I mean, that's what I was reading because back in the 90s, the young adult section was pretty much Fear Street.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a huge selection. So I think, and I feel like that's why it's just has always came natural to me, because it was what I was reading for such a long, long time. Um, However, it is some of the harder scenes to write because it has to make sense physically. Because you don't want to be like, where'd the third hand come from? Because if like you got two hands here. So it can be very mechanical when you're writing the scene. It's actually the same as writing a fight scene.
Um, do you have words you won't use?
There are words that um, nipples is one of them. I do not know why. That's just one of them. I don't know.
Everyone has an ick, so I'm like, what's your ick?
I'm like moist. I don't care. Like that doesn't bother me. Nipples and panties, I'm just like, I don't know what it is. It makes me go, why not? But I force myself to use them. No, um, I don't use. I'm not going to say it. The P word often. I don't like, or the C word. I don't think that is something, especially the C one, I would not find that remotely attractive. If I was in a
Not very
moment,
romantic.
right, I'd be like, excuse me. And I do understand like Australia and I think a lot in England, and that's a version, their
Common
version
one.
of damn. So I mean
Yeah.
it's different from where you live, but those types of words I usually don't use. It's just because it's just something I personally would be like, what? So
Can you give us a sense of where the series goes without spoiling it? Because there's a new book coming, but I also know that there's people in this room that have read the whole series, and then there's people who haven't. So if you can give us um, a summary, but not a spoiler.
yeah, so a lot of reveals are coming, a lot of truths. You're gonna see Poppy kind of awakening to the truth of the world that she was brought into, but not just her. Also, I can say it, Cass. So I hope people have
Yes, no,
finished.
you can talk about the end of this
Yeah.
book. Everybody, we
Um,
assume you've finished, and if you
yeah,
haven't, too bad.
yeah, that's not our fault. No. So Cass, even things they believe to be true, and we're not. So you see an expand and also a greater expansion of the series. You will see Atlantia, you will see then beyond that, the land of the gods. Um, there's a lot of unraveling, and I think even with its fantasy, whatever, I always like to have it to be a little bit of a mystery where it's like you're starting to put things together. A lot of romance, a lot of heartache is coming down the pipeline for you. But yeah, I'm trying not to say much without spoiling things.
Do we
But
see Tawny again?
yes, yes, you do.
Okay, I wondered about that. I liked her
And you
character.
also will see Ian. You will see Ian, which
That's
is
her brother, yes? Yes. So when you're writing, you said you don't plot very much, but when you wrote From Blood and Ash, did you know this was going to become 6 books?
I never really know how many books it's going to be, and that's why I need to stop saying how many books it's going to be because inevitably I have to go, well, there's going to be another book. I have a general idea where a book starts. Not a general idea. I know where the book starts. I know where the middle of the book should be, and I know where the end of the book should be. And the same goes for the overall arc of a series. I I let the story kind of guide me to those points. Now, when I get to what I call the mid-book crisis part, where you just finished you just finished the middle part, and that's just like usually where you just hate everything in your book. You're gonna kill every character and just be like, haha, spoiler, everybody knew now. It's like, just get rid of it all. I will actually start plotting it out at that point. And I also do that because when you hit the end of the middle, you're kind of rolling downhill towards a climax. And so I try to plot out that point. So in a way, it's like you're a little bit of a plotter, a little bit of a pantser. I wish so badly I could plot out every chapter. J.R. Ward, I think, writes like sometimes like a 20, 30 page outline. I could never. I just couldn't. I would just be like, I don't, because I'd be like, I have to come up with all these ideas right now. Like, so so it also, another thing too is I don't like to marry myself to a certain plot thread, because if it doesn't work out anymore, you can end up spinning your heels, like trying to make it work because you've already told yourself this is how it's going to go. But there are certain things that happen with characters. There's certain things that happen that I know from the beginning that are going to happen. What can change is when it will happen.
Okay. I can keep asking questions, but I feel like that's mean when there's people in the room. Does anyone in the room have a question? I'll turn the camera around. I'm going to turn the camera around. There's people there. Sorry. You can see some of them, but not all of them. The tablecloth is not working. Questions? And if you have questions, speak up.
Don't be shy. You can ask me, Jennifer, why did you hate Game of Thrones so much?
Are we gonna get any more point of view from Cass's side of things, like a solo book?
Yes, you actually get a whole book of his point of view. Or have you read?
I've
Oh
read
yeah, okay. Yeah, yes. Actually, the Primal Blood and Bone are dual POV. So you get quite a bit of Cass in that one.
Keep asking questions if you have them. She's your captive audience. And she's in the computer. She's not scary.
it's it lives on YouTube, Sam.
Yeah.
I am like just like totally obsessed, or I am not a fast reader, and all of a sudden I've read the first 4 books. I'm now on the book 1 of Flesh and Fire. So I'm doing that reading order of the release date, but now my friend Caroline says we don't have to do that, and I'm confused.
Yep.
What how do you recommend going forward? Like, I've done the first 3 Blood and Ash, now I'm on Flesh and Fire. Just keep doing that.
And I want to say like that's such a compliment when you can read through fantasy fast, because fantasies I do think slow you down a little bit when reading, because you have to be like, wait, what? And like, because you have to visualize the world. So I'm glad to hear that.
I
So
haven't
now,
even,
I'm
I'm
sorry.
like, I haven't even read Onyx Storm yet because I'm reading your book. So
Haha, take that, Rebecca. Um, no, so I would read the Flesh and Fire series first now, because it's complete. The Flesh and Fire series is a prequel. And you really don't understand why that is until you get to about the 3rd book in the Blood and Ash series, when you start to learn more about the gods and who they were. And obviously, from Blood and Ash, you learn that the gods are asleep. And so you get to go back and find out, like, okay, who were the gods and what happened? Why did they go to sleep? And you also do meet the big bad in that series. And so I would definitely start with A Shadow in the Ember. And they are 5 books. And that way, when you have to wait for the Blood and Ash books, you will have something else to read.
yeah, I'm almost done Shadow and Ember. So maybe I'll just go off and finish that series.
Mhm.
What happens next? But my heart just broke today, so I'm at that part where it's like no, where they find out her real.
Yeah, like it's A Shadow in the Ember, like with that, I wanted to really kind of purposely parallel like Sierra and Poppy until you see the parallels start to completely break apart. But yeah, that I'm when I finished writing that series, I was like, oh man, when you finish writing a series, it's very bittersweet, because usually there's a part of you that's like ready to be done with it, but also at the same time you're sad. But they come back. Some of the characters you see again. And so it was almost like I didn't have to say goodbye to them yet, except for the ones that don't make it. So, but yeah, it's you know, I hope you don't get. I hope you don't stay sad for long.
How did you decide to like start another series in the middle of one series?
So when I was writing The Crown of Gilded Bones and probably A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, when I started like getting more into the gods and Poppy was learning more about them and actually learning that, wait a minute, what I was told isn't true. And I got to the point where I was going to have to tell the true history of the gods. And it felt like an info dump. And it also felt like like you would be missing like the sacrifice, the heartache, the pain, the love, and the sacrifice that it took to get to where we were. And that's kind of where the idea came, to go back and tell the stories of the primal gods. And I felt like too, like also what helped is I had to flesh out their background for me to truly understand it. And so that's also where the idea spawned from as I was like scribbling notes and stuff. Um, so it really kind of came from just being like, okay, this makes sense. This makes sense. And also because I feel like every author, none of us ever seem to write a prequel first. It's like we always, I don't know what it is, but we always do that. And I think it's because almost every author, as they're writing, they learn more about their own world, as they write,
Well,
which
I am
allows them to
glad
expand
I
it.
read Flesh and Fire and those first because I'm holding on to that in my brain that he goes back to rest with his consort. We do learn that he'd gone back to rest when she called his guards. So I was like, oh no, they're gonna be okay because they're resting together.
Oh, wow, you're invested.
Yeah, I am. I love it.
Do you have any questions? No? No questions?
Sam's like, stop talking.
No. I just want everybody to have a chance. Really? Have any more? Because I can.
Isn't it relieving to hear that she's not a plotter to me? Because I want to write, but then like the last couple, she always asks the author, but you told her before she asked it if you're a plotter or a
Pantser.
And
Pantser.
I like got stressed. I was like, I'm never gonna write. I can't plot and do all this. And there's all these programs you've talked about, and it scared me. So I was like, I don't. But I really want to write. I think that you can like put words together into something that no one else had ever heard. And I like that creative flow. And
Yeah.
I'm like that. So I feel like to hear that you let it flow.
Yeah, honestly, that I would probably say it's probably 50-50. 50% authors are plotters and 50% don't ever plot out at all. You have to do what works for you. If you're not a plotter, don't force it because you will stop writing. It will kill your joy of writing. If you're a plotter and then you try to wing it, you're just going to be lost in the sauce forever writing. So it's like you have to find what works for you. And then usually what happens, I think those of us who don't plot end up developing a mix of that because ultimately most authors did not go to college to write. If they went to college, I went to college for psychology and sociology. I can try to convince myself that all the student loan I had to pay back is a benefit of my, writing the books now. We learn to write by reading, and then we get better at writing by writing. So when I first started writing and I wrote my first books, oh my God, yeah, I wouldn't even tell you how to plot. Um, you learn with more experience doing it, and because you learn what works for you. And I think a lot of us feel like you have to plot. But if that's not what works for you, that's not what you have to do. Like there is one genre that I write like every 5 years, it feels like, or maybe every 10 years. That is a thriller. Those I do plot out because there has to be red herrings. There has to be like there's a formula to that I do plot out because I just couldn't wing that type of book.
Okay, I'm going to turn the camera back on. Is there any questions online? While I'm do. So attractive when I stick my tongue out. Okay, let's talk about the length of fantasy books, because you talked about how you have to be world building, so the books are longer, there's more of a commitment. How much overwriting do you do? Cut down to what they're at? Because I know no author is like, this isn't long enough.
Right.
And end up fleshing it out longer, right? Like everyone has to kill their darlings. So how much killing are you doing of your own work to get to your final products?
I mean, oh gosh, like I feel like as the series progresses, the books get bigger and bigger and bigger, and less cutting occurs. Um, oh my God, Born of Blood and Ash is over 300,000 words. I don't know if you guys can see it on my shelf back there. Um, the one sitting up there, it'll hurt you. If someone chucks that at you, you want to duck. It's
Are
gonna
those
hurt.
your drafts?
No, those are that's the actual book sitting up there.
Oh, that is the book. Okay. I'm like, am I looking at books or am I looking at like bound drafts?
No, the ladder is in the way.
I can't believe you have a ladder. Shall we call you Belle?
Right. You can actually use it. You can climb up on it. I never use it though. I just wanted one. But I get nervous. It's a little nerve-wracking because it does move as you climb. But actually, I think you can put a brakes on it, and I just don't. Yeah. So here's the thing with word count. There is actually there is actual limit to what a publisher can publish because it's based on the format in which they're publishing in. Paperback and hardcovers can only have so many pages in them before it becomes a quality issue. Then they will get fancy with what they start doing at that point. That has happened on several of my my Blood and Ash and Flesh and Fire books where they've exceeded the word count, the page count, the page limit. And so they're trying to figure out how we're going to make this book work that it doesn't fall apart, especially when it goes into the paperback. So that's when they start lengthening, shortening the margins. They start saying, okay, how small the font can we go? Like, we don't need this extra page, so they start doing things like, okay, how many scene breaks do you really need to have? Like they start trying to do things like that. So I wish I didn't know that because it starts
You've earned that knowledge.
yeah, but it starts to mess with your head when you're writing and you're looking at that word count and you're like, crap. I've learned.
What is the word limit? Like, what's the hard
I've
limit?
learned once you get about 300,000 words, they start getting very, very worried. They start, and it's not, and here's the thing, hardcover, they can make it work for the most part, right? As long as it's like the trade adult size hardcovers, they can make it work. It's the price, it's the cost of printing, because they don't increase the price, even though it's twice the size of what they normally publish. And if they did, people would probably rightfully be upset. Like some people would understand that, well, this is like 2.5 books in one. It's still just one book. And so the cost involved goes up. And then once it goes into paperback or is in paperback, that's where it becomes usually a quality issue, where the binding will start falling apart on the book.
Let's talk about special editions, because that's how I fell into well, I wondered what was going on over there because I saw all the beautiful lighting. So how did this come about? How did these special editions start with the printing on the edges? And like, because I mean, it used to be, it was fancy if they cut the paper funny on the edges and it was a rough edge.
Like the roughed edges that look like old parchment.
Yeah, that used to be fancy.
I'm like,
That's
why
not
haven't
even
I gotten one of them yet? Nobody's done that with one of my books. I love that because they look like an old book. I have no idea. I have no idea what started this. I mean, I know where it took off. I just don't know who was the first person who was like, let's spray paint these book edges. Here's the thing. They've been doing that since 2012. People at home have been doing that. And my God, I don't even know how they do that. Usually what made it blow up are book subscription boxes. That
Okay.
is who really, really blew it up. Like the like Bookish Box, Owl Crate, Arcane, um, oh my God, Fairy Loot, uh, Illumicrate, like all like they all started doing it. And there for the while, the longest time, it seemed like not the Bookish Box, the book boxes were just doing like one type of book. Like a lot of them just did Harry Potter. A lot of them just did ACOTAR. And then they just started branching out. And a lot of it was because publishers started to be more open in working with them. There is a lot of trust involved. When you do a subscription box, 9 times out of 10, the publisher is sending some random person at home the book file because those books are almost always printed overseas. So there has to be a level of trust. Some publishers don't do that. They will handle the printing, but the boxes don't like that because they know they can go to China and get it so much cheaper, which allows them then to make a profit on what they're trying to do. So, but it was a book, subscription boxes is really because like all these special editions, except for the ones from the Polycon, are all book subscription boxes, like in the ones on the bottom. And
Do they send
sometimes,
them to you every time there's a special edition? Do you get sent a
yeah,
copy?
sometimes I have to nudge them and be like, "Look, I'll buy it. Can I buy it?" Yeah. So, but yeah, either I'll buy it or they send it to me. I like to go onto eBay. And it's hilarious because I need to like not use my name. But I go into eBay every like 6 months and I look for special editions of my books that people now they're not licensed. I do not care. Because I'm like, it's pretty. Because here's the thing, they had to buy my book to do this.
Right.
Like, so I'm getting paid, the publisher's getting paid. Um, and I go and I just go online every 6 months and look for the special editions that people just do in their house. And some of the most gorgeous. And you can't see them in here. I have them in other places where they like bejewel the actual hardcover. And it's just, I mean, just the gorgeous stuff that they've created. So I think it started at home. And then um in the United States, I think there's like one or two what they call a biblical printer. And that is the only type of printer that can do sprayed edges and foiling. And those printers are almost always booked up by the publishers because they also can do color interiors. A lot of them are done in China. I do believe some are done in Mexico, and I have learned recently Canada.
Oh,
So
happy to help.
yeah, so a whole bunch of primal copies are actually coming in. I'm not allowed to say why yet, but they're coming in from Canada because there's a certain type of printer there that are being printed at. So which I hope soon they're going to be able to announce that. But yeah, so Canada apparently has some printers for it. But I feel like that must be new because this was the first time I even heard that Canada had there was that Canada had it because it was always China, Mexico, and Italy is another one that's been doing a lot of them.
What what's your book writing schedule like? How do you, because I want to talk to you about a Polycon, but you have a lot going on. So when do you write the books?
I write every day, unless I am traveling. Christmas, I'll take off. Um, yeah, every day I'm writing. I used to write for like a lot longer during the day than I do now. I have a degenerate eye disease called retinosis pigmentosa. And so my eyes, as the disease progresses, my vision does get less and less, but also it makes me develop cataracts. And they don't want to remove the cataracts. Problem with cataracts is the glares, right? And so I can't write as long as I used to. I mean, I would sit at this computer for 12 hours and just be 12 plus. Now I can't do it that long. But I'm pretty much writing every day. I've learned that when I do take time off, it is a disaster when I write again. It's like I forget how to write. And I'm just like, I don't know how to formulate a sentence that makes sense. So it's every day, mainly because I do have other stuff going on. So
So do you shoot for like do you shoot for a book every certain amount of time to your publishers, or because you said you have a lot of active contracts with different publishers, like do you have
Yeah,
like I want to get this done by this time so I can get this done by this time to get this done by
yeah,
this time?
yeah. I have, I at one point in my career, I had 8 books due a year, to different publishers.
Girl.
Yeah, yes, and that's how I have over 70 books published in what is considered a short time, since like 2010, 2011.
That's still a
And
lot.
that
That's
is,
intense.
and I was writing 8 books a year. And yeah, so I mean, I have deadlines. I've had to push deadlines back. Because when you get into fantasy and you get more into the series, it takes longer and longer and longer. Where I could write a book in like a month and a half, that grew to 2 months, that grew to 4 months, that grew to 6 months, that grew to 8 months for a book, because it's a lot to remember when you are writing fantasy. And um, I used to set myself daily goals. Like I used to be like, I want to write a chapter a day or word count. And that's all fun and good until you're like beating yourself up for not hitting those goals. Even though you wrote some damn good words, right? It wasn't enough. So I kind of had to stop basing like that. And I just had to get to a point where, okay, was I messing around all day? Did I actually work? Because there are days that I know I was easily distracted by everything but working. But I will say I'm lucky. My publishers have been very lenient. That's not to say that I don't know they get mad. They just can't get mad at me. The agent takes that that brunt of it. But they just get mad because they get mad. But they also understand that, like, look, I'm one person. What do you want me to do? Kind of thing. So
Let's talk about the community that you have not only built, but the friendships that you have in the author community. One of the cool things about having this book club, this is year 10. This month marks 10 years. Actually, this month specifically marks 10 years of this book club,
yeah.
which is crazy. We've read your book 98, which is crazy. But particularly watching the way that women support other women to blurb their books, to pump up their books, to invite them to their events. Do you want to talk a little bit about that before we talk about a polycon, or do you want to talk about a polycon and how it feeds into that?
Yeah, I think we can talk, one and the same. This is actually our 10th year of the Polycon.
Oh, I love that. I
Oh,
didn't realize that.
well, actually, February, we passed it. It was in February in 2015. But when it holds in April, April will be the 10th year of us doing it. Um, Honestly, a Polycon came about because I didn't want to do a bookstore signing by myself. I had a book coming out. I love doing bookstore signings. They're also the most terrifying thing you can do, because no matter where you are in your career, it does not matter who you are. You're going to do a book signing where you're going to be sitting there twiddling your thumbs and
No
being,
one shows up.
and you're just like, oh, this sucks. So I was like, why not make other people miserable with me, kind of thing. And one of my book blogger friends came up and said, "Hey, do you want to do a book signing? I can go get a hotel." And that's where it all started. It all started because I didn't want to do a book signing by myself, and I ended up inviting authors that I had met through different events and conferences. Um, so it was kind of like people I knew. And then then they could suggest, "Oh, hey, what about so and so?" And so it kind of started from that, just a day event. And then it grew and grew and grew each year, to now where it is a conference. It's several days, there's panels, there's parties, there's 2 days worth of signing. Um, and it's gotten that way partly on the support of other authors and the support of the community itself, of readers.
How many books do you think you sell at a Polycon? I don't mean you. I mean, so I'm in the Facebook groups and stuff, but I mean, I'm in the middle of nowhere, Canada, and I haven't been to a Polycon. But I've seen the posts about like, is this crate regulation size? How many books can I
Oh my
cram
God.
into this? Like the
I
planning
don't know how
that goes
people
into this.
travel with this. Like, I'm like, because,
But they
like,
buy like
like
20,
way
30,
limited.
40 books while they're at this conference.
Yeah, so I really it's hard to tell because so many authors do pre-orders, but I can tell you, ever since the rise of the special edition, that is the big thing. People want special editions at events. I could tell, I know of some authors because once authors do, when they do pre-sales, once they hit a certain number, they need to let my staff know because that's a problem. Not in a bad way, but that's a problem for us because we got to figure out how you are actually going to sign those books, how you're going to get those books out of here, because we have to keep because the programming moving. And I can tell you, there's some authors who've sold 1,700, 2,000 copies through
In 2
pre-order.
days.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that yeah, and so and then but here's the thing, like if you don't sell that, that doesn't mean you had a bad event. A lot of it is because the authors are offering special editions. And that was something I forgot to say with the special editions. Once we learned where the printers were, it was like game over. And so like and the printer CC from China has come to a Polycon. So we got to meet them. Um which was so cute because they brought us gifts. And it was just so cute. And but yeah, people can be very they can sell a lot of books. You also can do events and sell none. And what I always want from authors is for them not to feel like that's a reflection upon, where they are in the career, because sometimes it's like the author list where you realize, and it wasn't intentional, that you have mostly fantasy authors. So if you're like one of the handful contemporary, it may be harder for you. Um, or vice versa. We try to when we are because any author can sign up. Um, and as we're looking through it, we try as much as possible to make sure there's more than just like 3 historical romance authors, right? That because we know that that could be a waste of their time and money at the end of the day. So we try as best as we can, so that when the tickets go on sale, it will appeal to people who read historical romance, type of thing. Um, but it's really about community. It's like you get to go there, you get to hang out with your author friends and meet readers. Before COVID, there were so many more events than there are now. I was doing an event like once a month. I was traveling and I was getting burned out on doing it because sometimes it was in US, sometimes it was over in Europe. And while it was really fun, it was also just so exhausting. And after COVID, so many events just shuttered up and just stopped. And so there's less opportunity for authors to get together and for readers to meet authors. Because I really haven't even seen like book tours return as high as they were.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's just the opportunity of, and I think these types of events, they're more than sales, because it's sometimes it's like, man, anybody who works from home, it can be very isolating. And while it's great to work from home, it is still can be isolating. And so it's like just this opportunity where you get to go hang with people who understand, you know, your work, what you go through, what gets in your head. So a lot of times it's like, if you ever go to these events and you want to see, if you want to meet an author and not be in line, just go to the bar. That is usually where they are at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Why the
Yeah.
name? Where did the name from it come from?
So Apollyon is it's based on Apollyon, and that is from the Titan series. That was the first book that came out when I did Polycon. So it was a play off of that series. So we've always kept it at this point.
How do you feel about creative types taking license with your characters and making art and making things and selling it?
Um, I shouldn't answer this question because I understand I understand if authors are upset about that, because at the end of the day, that is that was something they created. If you are creating something based on someone else's material, you should be getting permission, especially if you're selling it. However, I I'm sure if my agent heard me right now, they'd be like, never shut up. For me personally, I don't say anything. I will go on eBay, not eBay, Etsy, buy,
You
oh,
talked about this, yes.
right? I go into Etsy and actually buy fan art. If I was able to turn my computer around, I'm sure when I turned it, you saw all the fan art over
Yeah.
here on the I just sometimes go on Etsy and buy fan art. People didn't license it. I still think it's pretty. I actually look at it as marketing because at the end of the day, there are fan artists who are very popular, who have their own following, and they may not have read my book, but they keep seeing these characters being drawn. They're actually selling my books. Now, if somebody wants to license with me, then yeah, we go into a licensing agreement. That does get complicated when you have like film or TV rights sold because the studios usually want the merchandising rights to something. But I'm very open. I mean, that doesn't, I'm not somebody who's ever going to enforce that because at the end of the day, you're actually selling my book. Like because I have read books based on fan art I've seen. And, so, and another side of that that does get complicated is when a drawing that a person does, that is their interpretation of the characters. That is not always going to match other people's interpretations, and it's not going to match how I wrote the character. I try to stand back from that because that is someone's idea. And I mean, I think we all know this. Everybody can read the same book, the same words, and walk away the same, I mean, vastly different interpretations. If I am involved in the artwork at all, then is when you can always tell especially Blood and Ash, there's one way to tell if I'm involved is Poppy. Is Poppy thin or plus size? And if she's plus size, I was involved in the actual thing, the creation of that. Uh, and the thing is, with one thing I have learned through watching other people's fan art is you can describe a character and draw because in fantasy you can't be like, oh, she wears a size whatever. That doesn't work. So
Especially in that time
right,
period.
you'd be like, oh, that's 5 hands. I don't know. I don't even know what they would do. But so you have to come up with other ways to show it. And just like we tend to like whitewash characters when we're reading, we skinny wash characters when we're reading. And so and often what happens, people go back after they hear me talk about Poppy and Syrah, they go back and they're like, oh, yeah, there was the, it was always in there. But I think it's because we are so accustomed to reading about, what they people consider the ideal. Weight, appearance, all of that. And so, um, but that's one way to tell usually if I've been involved in the actual fan art. But I think it's amazing seeing like all the different interpretations, and I'm always honored because my God, like, I think that's so cool that someone was so invested in your book that they were able to take your words and bring them to life.
Speaking of film and TV rights, this is going to become a TV series. Who with whom? What can you tell me about it?
But it's so funny. It's with Sony, it's for TV. It was with Amazon Studios for a little bit, and then now it's over at Sony. And I can't say more than just today at 4 o'clock. Spent about an hour and a half with the showrunner. Um, I don't think I can say who it is. I think people will be happy once they realize who the showrunner is and what they've done in the past. So it was really fun. And, whenever you have like those calls of like showrunners or directors or producers, they're always like calls to make sure you're not like going to be a pain in the ass. So it's like somebody bites the bullet to call the author. Just make sure that the author is not going to be a pain to work with. I mean, at least that's how I always take it because you often spend very little time talking about the book, and it's mostly like them trying to get like a
Your
feel for
personality.
you and how much are they going to be able to work with you. So yeah, so Yeah, so there's a showrunner that's attached, and they're very amazing. And the thing with Hollywood, it's a lot of hurry up and wait. It takes so long, and that's something I think readers forget sometimes, is that, yeah, it's like 2 years before they sometimes can even go into production, because they've got to get a screenwriter and or a showrunner. They have to get a script, or not even a script. It's either a pitch or a pilot episode. Then they got to get the director, the producer. They usually do not cast until they pitched it to a studio and they've gotten the option to acquire. So you got to realize you're now a year and a half into this, and you haven't even cast it yet, because they can't really cast until they get optioned. I mean, or excuse me, acquired, because who's paying these people? So it's quite a process to go through. And to be honest with you, I honestly forget about it until I get an email and I'm like, oh, I'm like, this is happening. Um, so I always keep myself very grounded by it. And so I'm always like, until I get the check that it's been in production. And even then, I don't 100% believe it'll happen. There are so many pilots that are filmed that have never seen the light of day. And, and one of the biggest examples I remember is Game of Thrones. Like the pilot episode apparently was so bad and so confusing. Um, but HBO believed in it so much, they did the thing that almost never happens. When a pilot episode bombs, that's it usually. They actually had them go back, rewrite the episode, and recast. Like Danny's character actress was recast, like a whole bunch of people were recast. And so you got to think, like, there's so many TV shows out there that have pilot episodes that just sit, I guess, in a vault somewhere.
Does that mean there's a Game of Thrones where Jason Momoa doesn't exist?
I don't even, yeah, I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious, 'cause I don't even think he was in the first episode.
No, he's not, but it's just funny
No,
to me
he is. He's in the first one. But I don't think he was in the pilot episode. And
Mm,
it's a completely different actress that
that's what I
portrayed.
mean. Like just a world where that could have been a
Yeah, like,
completely
and then you
different.
try to imagine it, because, like, I've seen the actress and but I'm like, I would never be able to, it was like, oh, but that's not, but if she played Danny, she probably would have been a great,
Mhm.
Daenerys. But like I know there's been a couple book adaptations that had pilots that have been shelved. And it just seems like, you get all the way to that point where you have a pilot and it's just bloop.
Yeah.
It just-
Okay, I could talk to you all night. This is fun, but I love to talk about the best books you've read lately. So what is the best spicy book you've read lately?
I have not been reading a
It
ton
doesn't
of.
have to be recent, like in the last week.
Yeah, I wouldn't say like I've read like that I would say it was super spicy. But this is an older book series that I went back and started reading again, and that was Larissa Ion's Demonica series. And the best pitch I can give you guys, it's like if demons ran an underground hospital for other demons. It's
Okay.
amazing.
What
They,
is the best new release you've read recently?
oh gosh. Shoot. Well, I don't know if I can say.
Is it not out yet?
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I just was sent one for a blurb.
You can promo a book that's coming out for a blurb. It wouldn't be a
Yeah, I'm
secret.
just looking at sorry, I'm scrolling through my email because I don't remember the title. Uh,
That's fine.
and now I'm like, where is the email at? It was, oh shoot. You know, where did I do this email? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, here we go. Let me see when it comes out, because I don't, let me, before I even open my mouth, 'cause this could be like forever and a day from now. Sorry, please ignore my face like all up in the screen. Um,
You're really good. Look at your forehead. It's fine.
yeah, right. So I don't know when this comes out, but I'm actually reading right now Throne of Secrets. Um, and that is by oh gosh, I'm gonna say the last name wrong. Carrie Maniscalco. But Throne of Secrets, it is a fantasy romance that is very, 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 it's very addictive, very sexy. It has a very good plot. So that's what I've been reading right now. Um, because sometimes I don't have time to read like for a blurb.
Do you
But
get
I
asked to blurb a lot?
Yes. And so I don't always have time, but I will often still read it when I do. Um, and then usually what I do, if I couldn't blurb it, I will ask the publisher to send me like the book stuff, like send me the cover when it releases, and then I talk about it on its release because I feel like that probably has more of an impact than a blurb does, anyways. But um, so that's a fantasy romance that's coming out that I've been reading right now. That's been really good.
Um, is there anything we haven't talked about? What's the last book called? Let's talk about the last book.
The next book that comes out is Primal: A Blood and Bone, and it's very hard to talk about without spoiling anything. So, um,
What's the
but
release date on it?
uh, you know, um, I can
Can you give me?
tell you what it was, but it has not. It because of things that are definitely going on in the world. That's mostly America's fault. There is some slight, well, 100% our fault. There will we haven't announced yet.
Okay.
There will be a slight delay.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so because right now a lot of the publishers are watching for tariffs because a lot of the books are not published um, inside of the United States, and that'll my God, like you've already pre-sold books for one price,
Yeah.
and you
Interesting.
know, yeah.
I
So
never thought of that
yep,
particular.
it's, we don't even use the paper's not even from here. It's from China for the most
Oh,
part.
interesting.
A lot of it's from Canada, and a lot of it is from Mexico, where a lot of it comes in from now.
It sounds
So
like a really fun time for you.
it's been great.
Okay, you are lovely. I appreciate this so, so much. I know there's ladies in here with giant smiles on their faces. This has been so lovely. And I hope one day in a year that I'm not planning a wedding, that I can maybe come out and see a Polycon and all it is to offer, because I've heard it's nothing but amazing. And I mean, why not?
Yeah, and I hope you have a good wedding, and or maybe one day I'll just move to Canada.
I
That would
mean,
surprise me.
Saskatchewan's great. We're kind of in the middle of nowhere and it gets really cold here, but it's great for writing in that way that you'd never leave your house.
One of my good author friends lives in Canada, K.A. Tucker, and she has like this summer house that she goes to, but every time she talks about it, it does, even though it's the summer, it doesn't sound like the summer.
Where does she live?
Right. I don't, oh my gosh, I don't know. Like
Like,
it's
we're
just,
a giant country. This is not
yeah.
a,
And I think, I think she normally has a house like, I want to definitely say on the eastern side of
so like
Canada.
Toronto-ish.
And then I think her like cabin is more when you start getting into like the wilderness.
Mm.
Yeah, of like no man's land, maybe. I don't know. Like but it always seems to be always cold. But she thinks it's warm and she'll just say the temperature, and I'm like, no, that's
Oh
no.
yeah, it's warm today. It would be 32 in your world. And we're like, it's warm and people are barely wearing jackets. So
Right.
that's our world. Well, thank you so much. And if there's anything we can ever do for you, you have my email. And this has been so lovely. And I so look forward to the next books as they come out. It's so nice to see how your process is and everything else.
Thank you guys so much for having me.